There we go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right, welcome to this month's brown bag presentation on key performance indicators. These are the two charts that you have on your Role Center. You can pick and choose between these charts, but you can create your own. There are some that come with the system predefined, and they may or may not be useful in your organization. But the key performance indicators are all based on the user-defined reports. So if you can create a user-defined report for your information, you can get it into a chart. So let's start with let's create a new chart. So let's go and take a look. I'm going to use a couple of a row and a column layout that I already have in the system. So let's take a look. Most of you will probably have an expense summary row layout, so I'm going to take a quick look at that. This just takes my total accounts for different expense categories, and I'm going to use this. The other one I'm going to use, so that's my row layout. My column layout is called year-to-date 2. It's got year-to-date and historical information. So it's just got two columns. If we take a quick look at this in analysis, this is going to be one of the steps you want to go through as you're doing the creation of the KPIs, because if the information is right when you build the user-defined report, it'll be right when you create the chart. So you'll want to check and make sure the information is coming through the way you would expect. In our case, we may only be looking at the total expense rather than each individual category. So we'll have to see. But we don't have to use everything that's in this row layout, but as long as we've got information, the information we need, we can use a subset of what's in the definition. So let's go back over. So we've seen what the chart will look like. And let's head back to home. So this little arrow, this gets you all kinds of stuff, and we'll go through some examples as we have our new chart out there. But select chart, that's what you'll pick between the charts, but it's also what you'll use to create a new one and edit an existing one. So I'm going to create a new one. And GoToMeeting has interfered with my connection, so hang on just a second. All right, so select chart and create. And let's call this expenses, and maybe not all capitals, year-to-date and historical. Now the name is what's going to show up at the top of above the chart on your Role Center. You can have a description as well. It doesn't have to be the same thing. It doesn't have to be, it can be the same, it can be different, but it's the name part that's going to show up, so you want to make sure you understand what's the difference between these two. We're going to tell the system which row and column layout we're using. So our expenses summary and our column layout was year-to-date 2. Now, base X-axis on. I'll talk about this in a little bit. You can use row and column. There are some challenges with that. Most of the time when I'm building a chart, I'm using period. And then you have to give it a start date. One of the challenges with these charts is that the start date doesn't advance, so you have to go in there and periodically change it. And I don't want to look at this by day. Day is getting very, very granular. I'm going to go ahead and do month, and I think I only need to see 3 months at a time. So starting it in July, I'm going to get July, August, and September, which brings me through till now. As I move to October, I might come in and change this start date to August, or you can change the number of periods you want to show. The next part is what is actually going to be on those charts. You can see it's pre-selected some options for us. That's not really what we want to do. So let's go ahead and go to Manage and Edit. So here we're seeing Basically the same thing we saw when we looked at the user-defined report. We're seeing the column, we're seeing the rows. When you pick period, you can only have 6 elements per period. It can only give you 6 columns. So we have to choose what ones we want. We've got more than we need. Off the top, it picked the first 6 that it could. If I try and add a 7th or do something, it's going to give me an error message telling me I can't do that. So I think what we'll do actually, let's first clear these out because you have to do that. Again, it gives you an error once you hit 7, so we don't want to do anything else. Clear these. And let's do our program expenses and our overall expenses. Now I could have a column layout that had just those 2 columns, but I can also use one that I use for other reports as well, and I'm just leveraging these pieces of that layout. All right, so let's close that. Actually, let me go back in there for just a second. I usually pick column. I'm going to do a chart later on that will have a line in it. Step line, stacked column, it will depend on what it is you're trying to show, whether that makes sense to include that or not. I'm just going to go with column because that's fairly basic and that's what I generally use. Now down here, this is pulling the definition based on the row and the column layout. So we had a row called total program expenses and a column current year to date. And that's what's going to show up in our legend, but we can change that. So let's say, let's go with year YTD for year to date, just to make that a little shorter. But you've got total control over them. And this is, it's drawn from the row and the column layout, but changing this here is specific to the chart. It's not, excuse me, it's not going to change. It's not going to go back and change your row and column layout. It just used that as the starting point, and you can change it from there specific for the chart. So now we've added our chart, expenses year-to-date and historical, and here's our information. Here's our legend. You can see what we changed the values to, and we can drill down on those entries, and it's going to open up our detail information, and we can drill down even further into that data. So that's the first one. Let's pause here for just a second. That was a real basic one, and I feel like a little bit like I flew through some of those selections. So let's take some questions and see how we're doing, if I kept your attention.
And so far, Jess, we don't have any questions.
Okay.
And just a friendly reminder to everyone just to put your questions in the question box on your GoToMeeting bar, and we'll stop occasionally to address those.
Okay. So let me, this chart here for just, or this menu for just a second, let's go back into select chart, and I trip over this all the time, so I want to make sure I mention it to you guys. We've opened up the list. Here's a list of all our charts. If I hover over this, you're going to see the underline. This is basically selecting that chart to display here. If I want to edit this chart, if I click over here where I'm not getting an underline, it'll select this line, and then I can click edit. So just a distinction on when you're and this is generally true for anything in a list where you can select a value versus opening the value. So I can open that up. So let's say I want I don't want this in capitals. I could change that so it's upper and lower. All right, so if we're good with that one, so that, again, that was a fairly basic chart. Let me quick double check my notes, make sure I've covered everything I meant to do here. All right. Now let's take a look at some of these options here. Now, remember when we defined the chart, we said it was month. If we wanted to, we can change on the fly, change that to be something else. So we've got quarter. You could do day, week, month. Day is really very granular. I don't see you guys using that all that frequently. You can also move forward and back. These previous period and next period, though, that is just while you're looking at it here on the screen. It doesn't change if we go back into the chart definition. It doesn't change the start, that overall start date. Something did. I think it was when I changed it to quarter. But you can move it forward and back. Just know that sometimes you're going to have to go into the chart definition and change that start date as well. And you can move through the charts that you have, previous and next chart. All right, so let's go back into the chart definition. I want to talk about that base x-axis on. That's very hard to say, let me tell you. Trip over that. All right, so this field here, this is the one that I picked period. Most of the time I pick period. You can pick row or column layout. There are challenges, though, with how the dates are used, so I want you to be just cognizant of that. So I've changed this to row layout. It's now changed what my measures are. So let's go in and take a look at that again for a second to see what our options are. So it's just going to do current and year-to-date, and the x-axis is going to be based on our row layout. So let's change our start date back, and we'll go back to month and show 3 months worth of information. Close this. So now we get the individual rows that are in our row layout, all of our our expense categories and the total expenses. And it's showing, it says, this is where it gets challenging, and unfortunately this is in our underlying code that we get from Microsoft, and it hasn't been changed yet. It's not showing quite the month we expect it to. It's really showing, we're telling it by month, but the date range we gave it was a 3-month range, that start and end date. So it's a little confusing. It's taking the month, though. It says it's, okay, you gave me 3 months, but you say you only want to see a month, so I'm going to pick which month it is. If you click down, this is going to be a tip for you for creating these, you can always drill down into the data and show filters to know what is it. This is giving me year-to-date because that's how the column is defined. That's the other complexity. You have to keep in mind how you're defining your columns in the row and column, in the column layout, and how that drives some of what you're seeing on the chart. So you can always check to see what's going on. If it doesn't look quite the way you want, you can drill down to understand what filters and where it may be coming from. So that's what the x-axis looks like, and you just need to be aware that sometimes that date is not, because these are year-to-date columns, and the date, it's not really showing us 1 month worth of information. If we really wanted to see a month, the column layout we would want to pick would want to be a current period kind of column. So let's pause again for a second and see how we're doing on any questions. I'm going to mute myself for just a second too.
Just checking, Jess.
Okay.
It looks like everything is pretty clear to this point. No questions so far.
Okay, I'm seeing a flashing. Is that you typed me a message that I ignored?
Nope, I don't think so.
Okay. Oh, it's you doing the welcome. Gotcha. See, this is why I have you to look at the webinar control panel, and I ignore it during these meetings. All right. So that's taking a look at select the base x-axis on, and I really challenge any of you out in the audience to say that 10 times fast and not trip. So I'm going to set this back to period because that's what I prefer. Actually, if I do that, yeah, it went back to these first 6. So let's just go ahead and take it as it is. So you'll note it only needs a start date when you have period because it can move it forward from there based on what you tell it, month, and so on. So that's our first chart. So let's go ahead and I'm going to take a look at some of your other options, the other kinds of charts you can build. I have one in here for fund balance. If we take a look at this, I've got select chart. So I have a row layout that looks at my funds. If we take a look at that and view it, you can see I'm totaling my net asset through expenses, so getting totals for each fund and then filtering. So my row layout is by fund. My column layout is just a balance at date, giving me the specific balance. And then again, I'm doing period, month, 3. That's me and my style. You guys will probably have something very different. Everybody has their own take on things. And that gives me a nice quick shot at where my balances are. So that's one. And let me take a look. I've got another one set up. Cost, here it is. So again, this is a user-defined report. It's all based on information posted, but it doesn't have to be just financial information. So I took attendance information. My little sample company runs after-school programs, so I've kept track of what attendance is week over week and posted that as a statistical entry. And then I have a row layout that looks at that statistical information and calculates the expenses based on that. So let's take a quick look at what that row layout looks like. So I pick up my attendance information, it's statistical, and I created a GL account that I call attendance, and that's what I post the statistical information to. But statistical information you can post to any account. It doesn't impact your financials. Then I take all of my program expenses, and then I do a calculation to figure out what is the cost per attendee. Then if we look at the chart, and then I just have a current period as my column. I'm just taking the attendance as a line and the expenses per attendee as a column. And again, period and month 3 because that's just how I roll. And we can keep an eye on how our attendance is going and also see the costs per attendee. So I wanted to show you that one because it has a line, and I think that's a nice feature under certain circumstances. And 2, because it shows you using non-financial data to convey information here. So let's go ahead and pause again to see if we've got questions or how we're doing.
Looking good, Jessica.
Okay. Well, this one is a fairly short brown bag. I feel like I was hoping for more questions. You guys are not tripping me up here. Are there charts that you guys are envisioning that you would like to see that you don't know how you might approach it? Let's throw that out because I've pretty much run through the basics of creating these KPIs. And we have quite a bit of time left, which means I either didn't prepare enough information or I went too fast. Let's give people a couple questions, see if they've got anything for me.
Sure, we can give folks a few minutes here.
While we're at it, I did want to bring up, there's one thing that you're going to be very careful of or it can trip you up. So when we're looking at the legend, and remember I told you when you create the chart, it's pulling that information from the row and the column layout. What this means is if you have the same value in a label on a row or a column, it's going to give you an error message. So let's take a look at that for just a quick second. I can show you what that might look like. I've got some in the row layouts. So if we look at this buy fund, the buy fund 1 versus 2, you can see I've broken out net assets, revenue, expenses under each fund. So as far as the software is concerned, I've now got rows, multiple rows that are called net asset. So if I go into my chart and try and pick that, it's going to give me an error message. And let me show you what that error looks like, just so you guys are aware and know what and can be prepared. So let's edit that fund balance to, instead of using 2, we're going to use 1. And there it's going to give you this error message saying you can't use this one, come on, because there are duplicate description values. So that's what that's talking about, is that it knows that the legend that it wants to base will be confused because you won't know which particular item is net asset in our example. So you just want to be aware of that you may need to, in some instances, you may need to create a new row layout that's just used for the chart. Other instances, you may want to go in and just modify the chart, the row layout or the column layout to give you a unique value for each line. Excuse me just a moment. Sorry about that. Em, how are we looking on questions? We look pretty clear, I think.
Yeah, I think everything looks great. No questions.
Okay, well, then I guess I'll go ahead and wrap it up. Again, it's a little bit shorter this month, but it's a pretty targeted topic. If you guys have questions, if you run into stuff, let me know. We'll contact support, support at onenfp.com. We're happy to help. I think the charts are a very nice feature. They're nice to give you a quick glance. And we love to hear how you guys are using it. If you do get a chance, just get in there and start playing and building your charts. Send us your examples. We'd love to see it. Or if you see something you'd like some suggestions for enhancing the feature, please let us know. We're always happy to hear where we can improve. So thank you. And if you have suggestions for future brown bags, please go ahead and send those also to support. And otherwise, we'll talk to you next month.